right, welcome to Minhag Dirigo, a Jewish Maine podcast. I am your host, soon to be Rabbi Brian Kresge, and joining me today is Andrea LaFlamme, a write-in candidate for the Democratic Senate nomination, and uh, and I'm really excited to have you today.
Thanks. Thanks so much. I'm happy to be here, Brian.
Yeah. Now, what prompted me to invite you to this program? Ordinarily, we don't do political candidates. Graham Plattner and I spoke shortly before Passover, and while I think he and I had a good rapport as fellow infantry veterans, uh, I found his unwillingness to engage on his previous comments about Israel and some other things to be really off-putting. And he gave me a some of my best relatives are Jewish kind of thing excuse
Yeah.
for some of the things that have come up. And and really, it didn't defray my concerns. I don't have a problem with people saying things like what he said. What I have an issue with is when he positioned APAC as why rural healthcare in Maine is failing. And I don't care if people take money for APAC or not. I don't donate to APAC.
hmm
It's just how it positions Jews. Um,
hmm
and I felt like he really wants people to like him beyond what I think is normal, a normal baseline for even a politician, which
hmm
is to me a part of the same pathology that fueled his Reddit escapades a few short
hmm
years ago. I don't think he's a stable, mature, or policy informed candidate to replace Susan Collins. Uh, and I've kind of find the tolerance for that to be really horrifying, as widespread as it is. So I was really looking for a competent candidate, and one of your college students introduced me to your candidacy. Read your
hmm
policy statements, really excited. Uh, so I guess I should just start with a question of what's prompted you to run for the Senate, and yeah, why? Why would you do this to yourself?
Yeah. That's a really good question. I think it definitely takes a certain kind of person with a certain kind of guts to run for U.S. Senate. It wasn't something in my long-term career path, I obviously didn't go to school for political science. I'm not a lawyer. But I think that we have enough lawyers and business people in DC. Um, so back in 2022, I actually am the person who chalked in front of Susan Collins' house, asking her to support the Women's Health Protection Act, which would have codified abortion rights for Americans. And I did that because I, like many Mainers, have reached out to her through the normal channels, right? Phone calls, emails, and if I get a response at all, it's in the form of a form letter that may or may not actually be about what I even asked about in the first place. So, being a teacher, I use chalk all the time. Tried to think creatively, right, about how can I get her attention, and boy, did I. It became clear that she didn't care what I had to say, but when she called the police and called Public Works to come and wash away my messages, it became clear that she also wanted to silence me. And that really, really upset me, really struck a nerve. Um, and I thought, well, crap. I mean, at that time, was newly elected, and I thought, well, we're stuck with her for a little while now. But it kind of got the gears turning, and at the beginning of last year, I really started thinking about it more seriously and thinking about what qualities were important to me in an elected official. And I started thinking about the things that I would bring to the position. My extensive education in public health and nutrition, my background as a teacher and as an elected union leader. And I found myself talking myself into it a lot more than I was talking myself out of it. Um, and and I know, I mean, so I registered with the FEC back in June of last year. But shortly before I was going to announce my campaign, I encountered some health problems, and it took me several months to kind of get all of that under control. So I wasn't able to announce my campaign until the end of February, which left me with about 3 weeks to collect the signatures that I needed to get on the ballot. I tried really hard. I got about 1,600 signatures, but unfortunately, the threshold is 2,000. But while I was collecting signatures, I heard from a lot of folks that they were saying the same thing that you're saying, right? That they are looking for an alternative and that they didn't feel like the current cast of candidates really represented them as voters. So even though I know that it's an uphill climb, even though I didn't get enough signatures to have my name on the ballot, it became clear that if I had been able to start in January with the other candidates, that I wouldn't have had a problem, and that there was a real void in the candidate selection for this election, and that my voice was really needed. So it was important for me to stay in order to give all Mainers the opportunity to have their voices heard at the polls.
That's so important. I do, and the other good there, there's an advantage here, even even if the primary ballot thing doesn't work out, and I hope it does. Uh,
Mhm.
the At least you've incubated groundwork for. I know 6 years is a long time away. My concern is that Graham Plattner ensures another victory for Susan Collins. We have another 6 years
Yeah.
of Collins. So at least there's groundwork then, if you so desire to do this again in 6 years, you certainly could. And um, I, I'm here for that.
Good to know.
Uh,
I'll put you on my email list.
oh, absolutely. So do I understand correctly that you once or have led a feminist health center? Is that a true statement?
Um, yeah, so when I was an undergrad at the University of Maine, I was studying nutrition and pre-med. And so my goal was to go to medical school, which obviously didn't happen. But with that being my goal, I was really looking to get some more experience in a clinical setting. And I was a work study student, and there was a work study opportunity to work as a clinic assistant at the Mabel Wadsworth Center here in Bangor. So I took that opportunity. I didn't really know a whole lot about the Mabel Wadsworth Center and what they did and what they stood for. And my time there was nothing short of transformative, really transformative to who I am as a person, to my sense of justice and fighting for women's healthcare and gender issues. So, following my work study position, I actually stayed on as a volunteer and eventually was asked to join their board of directors. Once I was on the board of directors, I was elected to the president of the board at the age of 27, making me the youngest person to hold that position in the history of the organization.
That is really awesome. Do you think, well, it probably goes without saying that that would shape your Senate work on childcare, maternal health, and family leave?
Absolutely.
Uh,
Yep. And one of the things that happened during my tenure as president that I'm really proud of, we were going through a sort of an organizational transformation when the one of the founding members, the executive director, was retiring. And as a part of that transformation, I really pushed and championed for an expansion of services to include those for trans folks and people of all genders. So that's something that I'm really, really proud to have been a part of. Again, this was shortly after gay marriage was passed here in Maine. So issues surrounding trans health weren't as well known as they are now. And so I'm really, really proud to have been a part of that.
are there federal policies you believe are really urgently needed for women in rural and working class Maine communities, based off of your work?
Yes. Yes, a lot of things. Yeah, how much time do we have? Yeah, so I think for starters, we really need to codify abortion rights. Um, Abortion is a healthcare procedure. It should be something that's available to any pregnant person should have access to that procedure if they so desire. That would include eliminating the Hyde Amendment. So, if folks don't know, the Hyde Amendment prohibits the use of federal funds for abortion services. And what that basically does is really limits the number of choices that women who are on Medicare and Medicaid are able to have. And so really takes the choice away from them. And I'm a firm believer that everybody should have access to the full range of healthcare choices, regardless of um, their income level. One thing, I did an interview recently with the Maine Women's Lobby where we talked at length about women's health issues and also the care economy here in Maine. And so I was talking about specifically, we've seen birthing centers here in Maine closing down. It's a really, really terrible problem. And on the surface, I think it would be easy for somebody to say, oh, well, they're closing birthing centers. Is that because nobody's having babies? And that actually couldn't be further from the truth. What I've heard when I've talked to clinicians at some of these places are that the birthing centers are often the first to go, simply because they are so poorly reimbursed through Medicaid. And so a lot of their patients rely on government health insurance. And when those reimbursements are not enough to cover those procedures, that's what leads to those services being the first ones to be cut. And so I think we really need to take a look at how we are reimbursing care and making sure that our clinicians and care providers are being properly paid. Um, and along with that, I would really like to see an increase in training midwives and doulas. I think training additional staff will help to ease the healthcare shortage, particularly around um, birth care here in Maine. And obviously, those are two positions that don't require as long of an education cycle as going to medical school. So it allows us to really make a difference quicker. Also, historically, midwives and doulas are traditionally relied upon by people of color and a lot of lower income folks. And so by focusing on adding more midwives and doulas to our healthcare environment, it also works to ease health disparities that we see disproportionately burdening people of color and lower income folks.
Oh, very good, very good. This is I love your answers on this because I mean, this is how I would, as a voter, I differentiate between somebody that just has an economic populist approach as opposed to someone that truly understands health systems design. Uh,
Yeah, yeah. And I think, it's clear that healthcare is broken. And, healthcare is something that affects every single American, right? Whether you're rich or poor or healthy or not. And it's a real concern for people. And, I think it's more important than ever that we are electing leaders in DC who really understand the healthcare system and the importance. In addition to just understanding the clinical aspects, I am a public health professor. Sometimes people think to themselves, well, what's public health? I don't really know. So the difference there is healthcare is really focused on treatment, whereas public health is really focused on prevention. I'm a supporter of universal healthcare, as are the other candidates in the race. But I think what really sets me apart from them is not only my knowledge about healthcare and the health systems, but also my knowledge about public health, right? I really think we need an increased investment in our public health infrastructure. If we just focus on treatment, that rather than preventing people from getting sick or injured in the first place, we're going to continue to overwhelm our health systems. So we really need to focus on prevention too, so that we can treat illness today and prevent disease tomorrow.
That's great. That's great. Are there, well, and because that's it. I mean, provider shortages,
Hmm.
our aging population, the rural hospital
Hmm.
closures. I mean, I hear the horror stories all the times about the people that come into EMMC from, as far as Holton, for
Hmm.
care. Uh, are there specific federal policies that you see yourself championing, you would be a champion of to address those things, or?
In terms of what, like health centers closing down, the availability, like the number of providers we have.
Yeah, I mean, those are broad.
There's so many things, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
they're
like,
all bad.
because how you get a nephrologist in the state is way different than how you get like somebody, a cardiac specialist in the state. I mean, they're all so different, but I I mean, just having somebody informed in the Senate about these things is really useful, and as opposed to somebody that gives you the, the wide policy answers. I, I guess I could pivot a little bit. You've already talked about your commitment to reproductive rights, and gender affirming care. Is something, you mentioned it in passing there.
Mhm.
What do you have unique expertise you're bringing here? I really feel. Um, but I guess above all, what lessons from teaching health economics would shape your stance on Medicare expansion, drug pricing, or universal health care?
Yeah. So I think again, I support universal healthcare, and when I say that, I mean specifically a Medicare for all approach. I don't think that there should be such a job as a healthcare lobbyist. I don't think that should be a thing. I don't think anybody should be in a position to get rich off of other people's health or illness. Um, and I think that we need to start looking at healthcare as an investment in our population, um, and not like a business that generates revenue for insurance companies. Um, and really, by removing the middle person there, I think there's a lot of room for cost savings and ultimately a shift toward focusing on patient care.
Yeah, I just was at a conference a couple weeks ago where all we were talking about was value-based care, value-based care. Trying to get away from fee-for-service models, and really just, and it permeates Medicare. It's a
Hmm.
shame that it does not permeate the rest of our healthcare system. So uh,
Yeah.
I would love to pivot here a little bit to
Mhm.
labor and union
Mhm.
leadership. As an elected union leader, you've done more than just organize. You have done, collective bargaining experience. You've got
Mhm.
those things, not just like an outsider rhetoric about it. You actually have the experience. How would you say your Senate agenda for workers differs from other candidates in the race?
Yeah, I think I have a really unique understanding of workers' issues, both through the perspective of being an elected union leader, but also as a member of the working class, right? I'm an adjunct professor. I don't make a lot of money. Last year, I made $30,000 with no benefits and had to rely on LIHEAP for heating assistance over the winter. I really understand what it means to be a worker and have to rely on government programs. And I think that that sets me apart from some of the other candidates in this race. Um, I really take a worker first approach. And one of the lessons that I've really learned through collective bargaining and um, negotiations is really about listening to the people that I represent, right? Because even though I'm chapter president, I am still one voice in, within our entire union membership. Um, and so, for example, I represent adjunct professors at all of the community colleges across the state, and the nutrition class that I teach at the community college is a science course with a lab. Um, and a lot of the adjuncts that are a member of our union teach humanities and lecture-based courses. And so that requires a dialogue between us when we are negotiating a contract, because my needs as somebody who teaches a science lab-based course are going to be different sometimes than somebody who teach a lecture-based course. And just because I'm the chapter president doesn't mean that my interests supersede those of the larger group. And I think one of the problems that we're really seeing in DC right now are representatives who are focused on their own self-interests and not the interests of the people that they represent. And so I think that that's a different perspective that I would bring.
Awesome. Any labor reforms that you would prioritize for adjunct faculty, gig workers, the public sector's employees, or
Yeah, I mean, so just generally across the board, I want to increase the minimum wage. Like that's my number one priority. There's a lot of, really important legislation that has to be passed. But ultimately, these things take time, and we don't have time, right? People need help right now. And what research has shown us is that if you give money to somebody who needs it, they will spend that money on whatever it is they need. So if that's rent, they spend it on rent. If it's healthcare bills, they spend it on healthcare bills. If they need food, they spend it on food. Childcare, same thing. And so while tackling each of those individual industries is important, each of those takes time. And ultimately, once decisions are made about money, then it takes time for that money to move down through certain organizations, each of which kind of take their cut from it. And again, takes more and more time before that money actually gets into the hands of the people. And so just overall, from an economic standpoint, I think raising the minimum wage is really the one thing that will make the most difference and will get money into the hands of those who need it the fastest. Um, so that's, I mean, that kind of touches all sectors. I would like to see free community college nationwide. I would also like to address universities' reliance on part-time and adjunct teachers. Um, a lot of teaching is virtual, and I've taught at a number of colleges across the state of Maine and also in Oregon and Vermont, and it's the same everywhere. A lot of these schools are very heavily reliant on adjunct staff. Um, in those positions, the wages don't meet a living wage. You don't get benefits like health insurance or retirement benefits. And I think, I'm in a position to be a little bit of a canary in the coal mine here, because when we look at our colleges and universities, they're in a really precarious position right now, and we see increases in education costs all the time, but what we're not seeing is that money being given to the people who are actually teaching the classes. And so I'm concerned that our university system is actually resting barely balanced on the backs of exploited education staff. And that's something that I think needs to be addressed soon before it creates a real problem for our education system.
And I'm really glad that you want to do that from a national level. My oldest kid, she went to school in Florida, did her first 2 years at a community college, same exploitation of adjunct faculty.
Mhm.
Great education, and it prepared her for
Mhm.
her final 2 years at USF. That's and this is a really good segue. I mean, you've worked inside Maine's community college system,
Mhm.
so I guess this is another point of differentiation for you as a candidate. How would your higher education policy differ from candidates whose experience is outside of education?
Yeah. So for starters, I think, well, first of all, am a huge supporter of student loan forgiveness. I was very fortunate. Um, when I graduated from high school, I graduated second in my class, which at the time, I don't know if they still do this, but it was a really great program where if students graduated first or second in their high school class, they received a full tuition scholarship to University of Maine College. And so while I still had fees and bills I had to pay associated with my undergrad, I didn't have to take out any loans for that. And that allowed me a lot more freedom and allowed me to go on to graduate school and ultimately get that paid off in a timely manner and not be, burdened by that. And what I see among my peers is many of them still are buried under tons of student loans, and in some instances have actually already paid off that principal amount and still owe tens of thousands of dollars. And what that really looks like to me is handouts to banks, right? They're the ones who are making money off of the hopes and dreams of young adults. Um, so I think that really how we fund education really needs to change. What we require for students to pay and how we handle student loans needs to change. Um, it's it's really tough. One of the things too that to kind of circle back a little bit, pushed me to think about running for the US Senate. I've been teaching in the community college for 13 years. And in that time, I have seen the young adults that go through my class having a harder and harder time through no fault of their own. Um, and it's strictly because of, the systems of oppression, our economy, um, is all working against them, despite these young people trying so hard and working so hard, to try to build a life for themselves. Um, excuse me, I have students that have had to bring their kids to class because they can't afford childcare. Or I had one student ask if he could continue my class online because his mother was entering rehab and she was his ride to school. And I think that both being a teacher in general and also specifically being a teacher at the community college level really gives me a unique look into the problems and the challenges that our young adults are facing when they leave high school. And I don't know that that population is really being seen by lawmakers in DC. Um, and so I think that gives me a really unique viewpoint um, as far as what we need to change in college and university settings. Um, I've seen an increase in students needing to use mental health services that are offered on campus, healthcare services that are offered on campus. And I think as we look at the needs of students and how they need to be supported in order to learn and in order to be successful, we need to think about maybe integrating more of those community services into the college environment so that we can better support our students as they're, working to build their lives for themselves.
So it's all good stuff. I mean, and this is an opportunity. This next question is probably, I've heard some good answers from our particularly Democratic gubernatorial candidates on this one too, and I imagine there's a lot of partnership possibilities with whoever occupies the Blaine House.
Mhm.
Um, what role should community colleges and trade education play in rebuilding Maine's workforce, especially in our rural counties?
Yeah, I think we have a really unique opportunity to continue investing in our community college system. We have community colleges across the state serving students, even in the most northern parts of the state. Um, and these are the jobs that are required for us to really build our infrastructure here in Maine and across the country as we look at technology sort of seeping in more and more into the workplace and maybe taking some jobs away. A lot of the careers that we're training for at community colleges are very well paying, leave students with a much smaller debt burden, and are also in industries that are pretty stable when it comes to job growth and sort of being insulated from, some of the other factors that we see in the business world. Um, and again, I love, recently Governor Mills made the free community college permanent. I love that. But what I think is missing from that is certainly an increased investment in the education staff, because you can't have a class full of students if you don't have any teachers. And so I would like to see a larger investment on the teachers, and I think that that would continue to really help the community college system to blossom and move forward.
Awesome. Beyond beyond student loan forgiveness, how much of a priority would you put on tuition reform from a federal level?
Yeah, I I would be supportive of tuition reform. I obviously think that the money that we're asking students to pay is astronomical for and in a lot of cases, the jobs that they're getting after getting those degrees are not paying them enough to justify the amount that they paid to get the degree in the first place. Um, Sweeping reforms, I think, are a little bit difficult just because there is so much variation in the education system between community colleges, public universities, private universities, and how they structure their systems. Um, so that's, I mean, that's kind of a difficult thing to give a single answer on. I definitely would want to look forward to reforming it, but the exact strategy I think would really depend on the type of university and where they're located and the types of resources that they have.
I can't tell you how valuable well, I can tell you how valuable it is to have somebody that's at least conversant on what those challenges would be in a federal approach. So it's
Yeah.
pivoting a little bit more to the economy.
Hmm.
The presumed front runner. I don't. You can't really call somebody a front runner until the primary takes place. It really frustrates me, but
Yeah.
he really emphasizes kind of that blue collar populism. But how would your expertise, across the board, public health, education, how do you feel like that would better address Maine's long term economic resilience?
Yeah. So, I mean, I talked earlier about how, everybody needs healthcare, right? Everybody needs health. And um if if people aren't healthy, they're not productive, they're not happy, they're not, living their life to the fullest. And I think that focusing on people's health is ultimately what is going to bring growth and wealth and prosperity to our communities. Um, I think focusing on the working class is very important. As I said, I consider myself to be a member of the working class. I also think it's important that we don't leave out folks who aren't in the working class. And I'm not talking about billionaires. I'm talking about folks who, are on disability, who maybe aren't able to work full time for whatever reason, and being able to support them and their needs. What we've seen since COVID began is a real increase in some really big health challenges in our communities. And it's important that we support certainly the working class, but also support those who maybe find themselves um, not able to work at the same level that they once were. And recognizing the contributions that they are able to make to the community and still acknowledging the value that they have.
Do you see any sectors beyond Maine's traditional industries? Do you see those playing a role in Maine's future, and do you see any federal opportunities for investment in them?
In Maine industries specifically or outside of Maine industries?
Any so I'm understanding that there are great new forest products
Mhm.
that may be taking root, incubated in our university system. Uh,
Mhm.
but beyond forestry, beyond lobstering, do you see new? I'm hinting at like data center construction to a certain degree, but
Yeah.
do you see any industries as part of Maine's future that aren't presently?
Yeah, I would really not like to see data centers here in Maine. I think, one of our biggest assets is our environment, and it's what draws a lot of people to Maine, either to visit or live. And as we see the outright destruction of our clean air, our clean water, our clean land from all industries. I think it really concerns me to see how quickly and how aggressively um, companies, hedge fund managers, private equity, how aggressively they're really pushing this idea of data centers on people, even in communities where, you see these town halls that are filled with community members speaking out saying we don't want this, and then following the meeting the community leaders vote to continue with the project. It's really really unfortunate, and I think the costs environmentally are, we're already seeing them. They're starting to show up. I was reading an article, something about, in so far of a radius around a data center, the average increase in temperature and how they're seeing that impact the flora and fauna that are able to grow within a certain, you know, mile radius of data centers. And there's so much that we don't know, and everything that we know is really, really disastrous. And so, yeah, I would like to see more of a focus on um, industries that either focus on conservation or certainly don't focus on destroying our environment in exchange for shareholder profits.
You know where I struggle with this, and I say this as a technologist and who
Hmm.
works in healthcare.
Hmm.
So much of our preventative care models are becoming, and some of it's organic, some of it's happening. Oh, hey, we can do this, and we can better serve rural constituencies with this, and some of it absolutely is corporate cronyism coming in from this administration's control over CMS, for instance.
Hmm.
Um, so one of the things that I'm concerned about is that we're able to build out really good predictive modeling for population health, like when underserved communities, particularly minorities, are going to see their stages of chronic kidney disease impact them, uh,
Hmm.
and yeah, I'm concerned about turning off AI, and turning off the spigots for data centers
Hmm.
while we still see these like really good advancements in healthcare that are coming from it. How do you balance that?
Yeah, I think so. One of the things that you and I spoke about over email, you were talking about really this push to include AI in a lot of the medical sector and different provider offices and things. And for me, I think pushing that it is particularly problematic, especially when we're talking about um, you know, Medicare and Medicaid providers and maybe how their eligibility and status relies on their ability to implement these systems that, a lot of our rural health centers just don't have the capacity to do. And so I think we need a much slower approach. I also, and technology is not my field, but what I know about AI, you know, is that it's good at some things, but it's very derivative. It doesn't seem to be coming up with anything new. It's just making connections quicker that people have been making forever. And so I would love to see more of an investment in research. I would love to see more of an investment in um, the in population health, in epidemiology, in the classes of people that would be able to do the very work that you're relying on AI for. I think there's an opportunity to invest in our own people and really work on innovation that way. And I don't think we have fully realized those capabilities. I know that there's also been um, research to suggest that AI has a lot of biases, particularly when it comes to women's health, the health of people of color. Um, and so a lot of that is really problematic for me, especially from a public health standpoint when we're talking about addressing health disparities and health across all populations. I mean, as it is when we look at the National Institute of Health and a lot of the studies that they do, how long has it taken for us to actually test tampons using real blood? I mean, it's just insane. And so I think that we need to be looking at expanding our knowledge of, specific populations that have health disparities. And AI has not been shown, to my knowledge, to be able to really do that and really understand the nuances of those specific populations.
Hmm. It's interesting. I would love to forward you some materials on this,
Yeah.
just as a general, because there are really good advancements being made. More of
Hmm.
the struggle I have is it's sort of like the net neutrality argument. There is where I struggle is that we don't prioritize the compute power that we're in existing data centers. Um, my my request to do things for population health, it all depends on my ability to pay my Claude and Anthropic bill versus
Hmm.
there and my stuff comes in queue with, people making cute images, doing deep fakes, all those things. There's no we don't have any real good legislative controls over the what's happening
Hmm.
with our data centers to begin with. I would love to see uh, like the stuff that we're doing with Brandeis and Johns Hopkins as being I would love to see that get computational priority because what we're doing is not wasteful. What we're doing is not broken, but it's we can't advance it if we're falling behind a lot of these like kind of plenary uses of AI. So
Hmm.
I'd love to forward some of that stuff to you. It's lost on Susan Collins. I have a
Hmm.
sneaking suspicion it will be lost on some of our other candidates.
Yeah.
Um, but
Yeah,
I
this is a I'm really loving having this conversation with you because it is easy to see all of the wasteful uses of AI, and I think um part of that has to do with the people who are sort of behind the scenes, right? Who are pushing it so aggressively. And that really, like you said, we don't have a lot of legislation. We don't have a lot of safeguards in place. Um, and so the focus isn't on, you know, these big outcomes, that you see in your work, but rather they're focused on, making money
yeah,
and for the people who are in charge. And that leads to where we are now, which is, sweeping bans because of all the horrible impacts that it's having on the environment because nobody wants that. There's no focus on making data centers more conservation friendly, making them more efficient, making them, that's not a priority. Instead, it's just let's build as many as we can everywhere.
yeah. It,
And
it's
I think that's a
terrifying.
problem.
Oh, it really is. I grew up 3 or 4 miles from 3 Mile Island in Pennsylvania, and
Hmm.
when I was three, my father was a radio broadcaster, so he had to stay in place and report on the meltdown.
Hmm.
Whereas my mother and shuttled me and my very young brother in the car and drove us to up north. Uh, and growing up with that footprint, I mean, of course, the plant went on to run for another couple of decades without future incidents. But we're reopening it specifically because it has it will power data centers. And and growing up at the same river that TMI, it took decades to clean coal dust out of it from the previous exploitative, environmentally exploitative industry. It just I don't feel like we're taking the right, as much as I want the technology to advance, I
Hmm.
also share the concerns that we're way ahead of our skis in terms of the responsibility and environmental conscious governance. So it's good to hear a candidate that's not averse to new developments, but also is like, yeah, let's take a step back here.
Let's do it. And yeah, let's do it in a really like conscious, thoughtful manner. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, yeah, I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but like, what are
Yeah.
I if elected, which Senate committees would best use your background? Which ones do you think you would be best
Ugh.
used on?
I mean, anything having to do with education and healthcare. But I know, as a freshman senator, those are pretty coveted appointments. I think just my background as a working class person would really allow me to bring a fresh perspective, no matter committees I ended up on, but certainly if I got to really flex my teaching and my education background and my healthcare background, that's where I would want to be.
It's interesting because I feel like you balance both like the expertise, like the good old fashioned technocrat uh, competencies with a kind of insurgency politics. You're so much better informed than other candidates on a lot of these issues, but yet at the same time, you have that kind of insurgency vibe. Do you feel like that's working? Are you getting positive responses as you talk to
I
folks?
am. I have been getting a lot of really positive responses. I'm a bit biased, but I agree with you that I, bring a better perspective and my education and expertise than some of the other candidates. What's been really frustrating for me is I felt really shut out of a lot of conversations. Some of, when we were supposed to be having debates, I was reaching out to all of the media outlets that were hosting those debates and was told that I wasn't able to participate because I was a write-in candidate. There is a process for becoming a write-in candidate, requires you to go through an application process with the Secretary of State's office. And it's not just, anybody who wants to be written in can be written in. Um, there was a deadline and that was March 31st, and I'm the only one who went through that process. So it's not like, one of the things that I heard was that, well, if we let you on the stage, we're going to have just a stage full of whoever wants to come up and, say that they're running for Senate. And that's just not the case. There's only one write-in candidate, and that's me. And so in, a race that was for people, the focus was on three people or even really two people. And one of those candidates, me, one of the four, was not being included. And I think it does a real disservice to our democracy, to us having an informed and educated electorate. I think people want to be informed of all of their choices. Um, and so, in the opportunities that I've had to speak with people, either in my virtual town halls or at some of the campaign committees that I've gone to, I've had a really excellent reception and gotten a lot of support from folks. Um, they really like what I have to say. They see that I'm a competent, compassionate um, person who's been consistent in my views throughout my life and the work that I've done. And so the challenge has just been really getting my message out there in front of voters because when I do, I've had a lot of success with that. I know recently Graham has pulled out of all of the debates, and so they've been canceled. I think that's does a huge disservice to voters. I've personally reached out to David Costello, the other candidate in the Democratic Senate race, about having some sort of debate or forum between us, to give us both a little bit more exposure and time to get to know voters. And he has declined my offer. So I'm not sure why, but I remain committed to informing voters. And, in doing so, am thrilled that you connected with me. I have a whole host of meetings coming up with other Democratic committees across the state, planning some in-person town halls. I'm continuing to do virtual town halls. I have two a week straight through the primary. I think that's a really important way to reach folks who maybe aren't able to get to town halls, in-person town halls. And one of the things that I think is really unique about the virtual town hall model that I've found, is that I'll get folks from many different towns across Maine all in the same town hall. And that's been a really great opportunity. If you have an in-person town hall in one community, you're probably only getting people from that immediate area showing up. But we've really had some amazing conversations that have come out of some of these virtual town halls where we have people from urban areas and rural areas and all kind of coming together to talk about their concerns. So yeah, I I'm really excited about the path forward, and I'm really excited. I get more energized every time I have the opportunity to either talk with somebody like yourself, or just a group of Mainers on the computer or in a town hall, because the energy is there, the excitement is there. People want change, and they see that it's possible through my campaign.
Well, a lot of folks really want, and I must admit that I cannot vote for you because I am not a registered Democrat anymore.
Mhm.
But one of my grievances across the last 10 years has just been how often we get told who our nominee is going to be with just a semblance of a democratic primary process. And this smells like that to me, and it's part of my
Mhm.
frustration. But if somebody were to vote for you on, given that this is a ranked choice vote this year, how do they write you in? How do they do that on their ballot?
Sure. So actually, first I have a question for you. Can I ask what are you independent? Are you unenrolled?
Yeah, you have to promise not to laugh.
I won't.
But after I ran for state house twice in Pennsylvania as a Democrat,
Mhm.
and I was always a long-term Democrat. Grew up down the street from the AFL-CIO, very, very invested in
Mhm.
Democratic politics from early on. Was endorsed by the AFL-CIO and
Mhm.
the Hershey Chocolatiers Union, of all people back in the day. But
Yeah.
um, I loved it all, but I was invited to work for the Gary Johnson campaign in 2016 as his director for Jewish outreach,
Mhm.
and I registered as kind of like a let your freak flag fly libertarian, and
Mhm.
so I stuck with that. I just because I made a lot of friends, but also it gives me an immediate kind of outsider perspective on most
Mhm.
elections. I'm not ashamed to say it. I still vote for Democrats.
Mhm.
I've never split my ticket in all the
Yeah,
years.
no, and the reason I ask too, and this leads into the question that you had. I mean, we have semi-open primaries, so folks that are registered as independent or unenrolled can vote in the Democratic primary. Um, Excuse me, and a lot of people don't know that. So, yeah, if somebody is a Democrat or an independent, they can vote for me on June 9th. So I am planning on I've requested an absentee ballot, so I'm going to be sort of making a video tutorial on, what the ballot looks like and how somebody who wants to write me in can do that. But basically, the candidates who got the 2,000 signatures will be listed, and then there will be a line for a write-in. And so anybody that wants to vote for me can just fill out my name there on that line, and then hopefully check the box next to the first choice. And then, rank the other candidates as they see fit. Um, as a teacher, I like to remind people that this isn't a final exam, it's an open book test. You can, have your phone with you if you don't remember how to spell my name. You can look it up, that's okay. So, hopefully people, at least feel more comfortable about the fact and not really stressed out with that process. I've been telling people too, we all dislike Citizens United, and we dislike the big money in politics. And certainly we've seen a lot of that big money coming into play in the Senate race here in Maine. And having a real grassroots candidate like myself is a real opportunity for voters to send a message to the wealthy folks who are influencing our elections. And so I hope that I win the primary, but if I don't, every amount of support, every vote that I get shows what's possible and sends a message to wealthy political influencers that they don't have the power that they think they do over this election. And so I think that's a really important point to make. And the fact that we have ranked choice voting means that people can rank me first without having to worry, about any spoiler candidate sort of rhetoric that I've heard some people talking about because they don't maybe understand how ranked choice voting works. And so for that reason, I think there's a real opportunity here to either have a really excellent candidate in the general election in myself, or send a message that Mainers are ultimately the ones who should be choosing their candidates and not the wealthy.
No, very good points. And one of my frustration has been the sheer volume of out of state money that is poured into both can our front presumed front runners here.
Yeah.
And along those lines, is your campaign able to take donations, and do you need volunteers?
Yes. So you can, if you go to my website, andreaformaine.com, there's a donate link there that will take you to Act Blue. I know some folks don't like using Act Blue. You're more than welcome to send me a donation. Also, my campaign address is PO Box 150 here in Bangor. Um, yeah. I mean, I haven't been doing a lot of active financing or active fundraising. I know that, after winning the primary, um, I'm not worried about being able to fund my campaign in the general election. And so right now, what has been a primary focus for me is really getting in front of people and spending my energy on connecting with voters. Certainly, you're not going to see me having commercials on TV anytime soon. That's definitely not in the budget. Um, but yeah. Donations are always welcome. Volunteers are always welcome. We're a grassroots operation, so we're focused on, small interactions within the community, talking to your friends and family. I have, yard signs that are coming in this week, so you'll be seeing those out and about in your communities, hopefully. And on my website, I also have a Get Involved link, and that's where folks could sign up for volunteer opportunities. And I had mentioned earlier the virtual town halls. I have a calendar for those on the homepage of my website where people can click and sign up for one of those dates and times.
Well, very good. Andrea, I really appreciate you joining me today. I
Yeah,
really wish you luck. I think, from where I sit, you are exactly the kind of candidate that I love to see. Somebody that's passionate, somebody that's got the expertise to back up that passion, and the experience as well. And I wish you luck. I know
thank you so
people
much.
that will write you in, and if it doesn't work out, any plans to maybe run for the second CD in 2 years? Could we talk you into that, or it's
I'm just focused on this election right now. You'll have to have me back on once we see how this all plays out.
very would love to get an update, and hopefully it's to celebrate your crushing victory. So
Yes.
that's